Donc, je vais parler en anglais. Désolé, parce que si je vais parler en français, peut-être j'ai besoin d'une heure, 2 heures. Donc, je pense que c'est mieux en anglais. Désolé. J'espère que vous pouvez me suivre sans des problèmes. Okay, so this is, first of all, I would like to introduce my team. And, you know, everything I'm going to present, I didn't do anything. So just these people really are the core of the project. Alice on the right and Holly Raisin on the left. Alice Macera. So parent-offspring relation is a core, not only in psychiatry, not only in infant research, but also in primate research. So I think this is very important to keep in mind, because if we look at the evolution of parent-infant relations and caregiving, we better understand some of the core aspects which are universal, independent from the species. They might change in terms of timing, they might change in terms of behaviors, but the structure is the same. So the core functions are the same. By understanding this, I think we can better understand our species, the nature, and the possible potential developmental trajectories that are going in a wrong way. Let's put it this way. If we look at, you know, from a comparative perspective, we can see that in the course of evolution, we have expanded the period of infant development. So this has become much more important, so much more dependent from the caregiver, a prolonged period of time for learning and for having the effects of the social experience exposure, you know, to affect the brain development. So if we compare, I mean, there's a series of studies, I'm just summarized very briefly here, you know, macaques, rhesus macaques and humans, we can see that despite the type of behaviors like the smiling, the vocalizations are different, but the structure is the same. So macaques, I'm going to show you a couple of videos about that. Macaques, they go very close to their babies, they make smiles like teeth chatter, lips making, which is a typical affiliative gestures, only that they do when they emphasize the gesture. I'm going to show you when they approach the babies. It's a form of motheries. And so this is an example that you are probably more familiar with. So, one second. If you pay attention, you know, of the form and the timing of behavior. So these are the core aspects, timing and form of behavior. And sometimes you can see, if you look at the mouth, the microstructure movements, you know, second by second, even below the seconds, you can see that sometimes the mother tends to imitate, you know, in a very close loop with the infant, and the intensity of effect is the same. So all these behaviors, I'm talking about this because you're going to see that, you know, also in other species the same, and they are core for creating not only a bond, but for promoting social development and brain development. Okay? So pay attention to these two aspects.
Bebê, papai, vem! Vem, papai! É, amor? Fala com o papai. É, meu amor. Vem, papai. Vem falar com o bebê. Sai do boteco, pai. Vem falar com o bebê. Ai, ai, ai. Cadê o papai seu? Cadê? Cadê o papai seu?
Goes on for minutes, you know, like this. You know, they don't say anything verbally. I mean, she says something, but that's not important. Is the intensity of affect, is the timing, is the mirroring of the mothers. We show that. Sorry, I have to stop this. as a distractor. So we show this that, these mothers mirroring promote in the first 3 months of life an increase of social behavior of infants. Okay, so predicts the social development of infants in the first 3 months of life. And if we look this, so now you are going to see what I was told you. So this is lip smacking. If I do to Caroline lip smacking like this, if you respond to me, yeah, this means, okay, we can have fun. I can get close to you and I can groom you, I caress, I can have hug with you. But with the infant, it's different. But the difference is reassuring. It's just promoting, the infant's independence. Bouncing the head, the eyebrows, waiting to engage visually. So all the element of core, structures is there. This mother is not anxious. This infant is about a week of life, so it's very much more mobile. So why also is a good model to study macaques. So we know that the lack of this care, they produce, devastating effects. So, we know this from, after the war, by Spitz, by, John Bowlby, all the idea of attachment is what happens when this is missing. So now we can have also the opportunity to learn more about that, not only in terms of short-term effect, but attachment represents a core system to understanding this. So, for example, we know that there's a long-term effect. So this study is a study that has been run by a group of Americans in Romanian, so it's the Bucharest study. I'm sure that most of you is familiar with that. So, and they follow longitudinally this until Trump said, oh, this is not important, so we shut down the project, and so now it's closed the project after 20 years. So the longitudinal study has stopped now. So, and you can see that there is an effect, a long-term effect, despite the infants were put in foster care, were adopted. So there were some buffering, of course, of early caregiving, of early foster care. So this has a positive effect, but there's still some aspect like hyperactivity, attention deficits, emotional regulation deficits, anxiety in childhood, indiscriminate social confidence, and autistic-like symptoms, plus this persistent adolescence, which is quite interesting, this. And most of the psychiatric issues are emerging at this time, as you know. These studies up in the 70s, 60s, 70s, Harry Harlow, wrote a paper in the 52 saying the nature of love, by deeply depriving, monks. And we learn a lot about that, okay? So we learn a lot about that, there's impact, long-term consequence in terms of behavior, high risk of alcohol intake, anxiety behavior, highly stressed responsivity. Now we know more about the immune system. There are some interactions with some polymorphisms in terms of genes, so we know. But we don't know much about the brain. So there's very few knowledge about that. So I would like to point you out, and this is the core of that attachment can explain only part of the symptoms that we say, because there's also the intersubjectivity theory, in infant research that we're looking at these dynamics between infants in the first month of life, in the first years of life. They also are part of a motivational system, as Daniel Stern was pointed out, that is independent but communicating with attachment model. So attachment can explain some aspect in terms of protection, nutrition, comfort, okay? So the effects of early experience might affect some domains in terms of physical development, in terms of cognitive development, self-regulation and control. Intersubjectivity, these exchanges clearly provide a type of different input to the infants in terms of social stimuli, in terms of supporting aspects of communication, canalizing attention to social stimuli, regulate affects. So the effects of early experience might affect other domains that somehow they overlap with the attachment model, okay? And so when we look at the deprivation, we might think not only in terms of attachment. This is my point. So, well, I already talked about that, and we know that there's some effects of the brain, so there are a few studies of that. They're starting to look at longitudinally this, and especially at the age of 8 and 10 years of age, there are some effects, especially in the reduced thickness, that is one of an interesting phenomenon during adolescence. And for example, if infants were, that were in the orphanage, in the institutions, were put in foster care before 24 months of age, the cortical thickness was much more pronounced in these areas of the brain. The medial prefrontal cortex, part of the, posterior occipital temporal regions, which is important, orbital frontal cortex. So this aspect of cortical thinning, which is this effect, is very important during the period of plasticity of adolescence. So we wanted to explore the link between the early phases of development during the caregiving, when we alter this, and we would like to see what happens during the adolescence plasticity of the brain. So very fastly, so the idea is that if this is a critical period, in terms of brain sensitivity, and we are looking, for example, some of social or executive functions in the brain, they develop over time, we can see that if we alter the early sensitive period of development, we might have this period of sensitivity that might shape or reduced or expand, depending. But the important thing is that sometimes it's much more visible or amplified during the adolescence period or during adulthood. So it's when psychiatric disorders emerge during adolescence that these are become much more visible, at least from diagnostic point of view. So just briefly, I want to, do you have 5 minutes? Yes, she says it. She didn't say anything, so she said yes. So we run an experiment that, we came from the NIH, so we didn't separate on purpose the monkeys, but, there was a group that NIH was closing this. Thank you, Donald Trump. So we import to France, so they live in colony, but the first period of the first 10 months, they had a different experience. Some were reared with the mothers, some others were reared, with the group, with adults, but not with the mother, with all the support of technical staff, so they were really caring of that. So this is not a profound deprivation, but they lack the parental care of the mother. So these are my collaborators, Suleiman Ben Ahmed and Bassem Hiba. So, okay, these are two groups, started from the first year of life, they live together for the rest of their life. Now they are breeding, they are in the colony, they have the baby, so we can see also the patterns of let's call in your terms, of trauma transmission, transgenerational trauma, okay? So we assessed the brain at 2.5 years of age, 3.5 and 5, which correspond roughly to the pre-puberty, adolescence, and adulthood. And so, for example, we could run some attentional tasks, and we found that if you present two types of facial gesture, a threat, menace, or affiliative lip smacking gestures, we found out that, for example, the period, they tend to have a bias, attentional bias towards threat. So as it has been reported also for humans. And this is correlated in blue with the levels of anxiety behaviors in the colony, displayed in the colony. So another effect we found during adolescence is on executive functions. A very simple task, I'm not going to explain everything, but it is called the A not B task. So the monkey has to choose where the food is hidden in one of the two boxes, and then he has to remember where it was, And then after 2, 3 rewarded trials, we shifted the reward to the other. So the monkey has to inhibit the previous response, remember where it was, and then shift, being flexible in the choice. But to make it short, in red are mother ear, which are perform much better in all the scores of executive function, inhibition, inhibitory control, and working memory. Then if we go to the brain, so I'm going to show the longitudinal changes in the brain, okay? So these are the ROI, the regions of interest. So remember, this is, how we know in humans. So our hypothesis is that this cortical thinning is physiological in mother ear, so it should be like this, but we expect less plasticity in the peri-eared monkeys. And we think that the prefrontal cortex could be a core, regions for that. So just to show the results on dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, the 46 ventral, you can see that in red there is a decrease in the cortical thickness, and it's much more pronounced compared to the peri-ear, where basically they are stuck. There are no changes. And the volume of the prefrontal cortex is much higher. Not only in the prefrontal cortex, we found out other regions of the brain. For example, the orbitofrontal cortex, so it's very important for reward and for, also valence of the stimuli. The dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, and the parietal cortex. So we look also the white matter, but I'm not going to tell you more about that. Also, the volume of the amygdala is much higher in the peri-eared monkeys in blue as compared to the mother ear, and also the striatum the volume is much higher. There's no longitudinal change, however, so maybe we don't know why, but in general, there are structural changes. Some areas like the central amygdala and the striatum are associated in a negative way with emotional regulation. So this means that there's the volume of these regions are inversely correlated with anxiety behaviors.
Il nous reste 1 minute, Pierre-Francesco.
Oh, je vais terminer. Pas de souci. So this is just the last slide, which is the amygdala. So this is fMRI. So this is amygdala functional connectivity. So the seed is in the amygdala, and we looked at the pattern of functional connectivity. You can see on the left that the mother ear have changes over time with a very focused amygdala frontal connectivity. But, you can see the amygdala parietal and occipital connectivity tends to change. But what you can see in peri-ear, you see no changes and quite distributed functional connectivity. So there's no plasticity at all. They are kind of frozen. So this period is kind of unflexible period for the brain and for the behavior. So just what I think. This is just last slide. So I think that, the effects of early experience in terms of maturation of the frontal part of the brain and how they exert a control on some areas of the striatum of the amygdala and hypothalamus, should be the physiology, the physiological maturation should be in these ways to have a better inhibitory control, less reactivity, and less anxiety. So the effects of early social deprivation has somehow perturbed, altered this maturation of this frontal part of the brain, with the consequence that, you lack this control. So, and what you see basically are more reactivity, anxiety disorders, and a lack of inhibitory control and poor executive function. So I know that this is a very, simple message, but it's just a general message I would like to discuss with you later on if you have some questions. Thank you very much for your attention.